So day 4 got started in Culver, Indiana. I got breakfast and then headed up towards South Bend, Indiana, which is just about 40 minutes north of there. That's where Notre Dame University is, and I had a friend show me around the campus, the Gold Dome, the stadium, the Touchdown Jesus, and all that. Afterwards, I got back on the road, headed up to Chicago. I actually stumbled into the Indiana Dunes National Park and State Park, which I didn't originally plan on doing that day. So I got out and checked that out a little bit. I left most of that for day 5 tomorrow, but it was good to kind of get a lay of the land. And then I drove into Chicago. So after I got into Chicago and got settled in my hostel, put my bags down, I just basically spent the rest of the afternoon and evening just pounding concrete. I ended up going like 21 miles that day. And so my hostel was around Lincoln Park, and so I walked down there. I walked towards the Magnificent Mile, which is just a street filled with a lot of retail stores and shopping. And that takes you all the way down to the Tribune building and the river. So I went to the other side of the river, checked out some buildings on the Loop, it's called, some of the classic buildings in the commercial style, also called the Chicago School. I saw the sign that indicates the start of Route 66, which goes from Chicago all the way to LA, the famous road going across the country. And from there, I walked over towards the fountain to Millennium Park, where they have Pritzker Pavilion and the Cloud Gate sculpture, also called the Bean. And then I crossed back over the river, went out on the Navy Pier, and then walked back towards Lincoln Park, picked up some deep dish pizza, and that was a wrap for the day. So I can't talk about Chicago without talking about the Chicago School of Architecture. And really there's not one but two schools. The first developed at the end of the 20th century, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And it really coincided with the development of steel framing technology, which was an innovation in construction engineering in which there was basically a steel frame core of the building that supported the building's weight, that provided the structural frame for the building. And this way, whereas in earlier building you would have these large masonry walls that were load-bearing that supported the weight of the building, with this steel frame technology, this steel core supported the weight, and you kind of had this opportunity to develop a masonry facade, a masonry skin that didn't need to bear the load of the building. So the Great Fire in Chicago happened in 1871, where most of the city burned down, and that was right during the period when Chicago was growing really rapidly. It had become a city, I think, just like 40 years before, but its population had ballooned, and so they needed to rebuild the whole city. And so, somewhat fortuitously, this new steel frame technology was emerging at the time, and they rebuilt the city with use of this technology. And so that steel frame made possible much taller buildings, like skyscrapers, and buildings where you could play a little bit more with what was happening on the facade without having to rely on that for your support. So the Chicago School wasn't really like a unified school, in that it didn't have like a coherent sort of framework of techniques or like a certain standards that sort of made up that tradition, but it was sort of identified after the fact as the Chicago School. So some identifying features were just that it used the steel frame technology with this masonry cladding, often terracotta cladding, and then it also frequently used what are called Chicago windows, which consist of a large main panel of glass surrounded by two sash windows, which is kind of like narrow windows that open top to bottom on either side. Sometimes they're made into bay windows, so the large panes in the middle, and then the sash window. Bay windows just kind of stick out from the building, so you had the large frame in the middle on the part that stuck out, and then on the kind of like diagonal parts that connected the sticking out part to the rest of the building were the sash windows. So there's a whole bunch of buildings still in Chicago that express this Chicago style, or first Chicago style. There's the Santa Fe building, which I think is now called the Railway Exchange building, the Sullivan Center, the Marquette building, and some others I don't include pictures of. The second Chicago School is a little bit less distinctive than the first. It's really just modernism applied in Chicago, and so in that sense, it consists of very clean steel and glass structures with this machine aesthetic that was pretty unornamented, stripped of any sort of additional unnecessary nonsense. And this was kind of pioneered by Mies van der Rohe, who was a German-American architect. It was really borrowing from this large movement that was happening across the world by the Bauhaus School in Germany and Le Corbusier in France. He was really taking that and applying it to skyscrapers. And so this style was manifested in the Willis Tower, or the former Sears Tower, the Hancock Center, and the Federal Building.